You are a very assiduous Twitter user. I mean, your take on anybody, even people with like zero followers, which I think is overdoing it a bit.
Well, no, it's just that that's not the way I use Twitter. I use Twitter by searching my own name and responding to things, and I find that works very well for me. Other people wouldn't find it so helpful or convenient, but it suits me and it works. For me, Twitter is a substitute for the broadcasting I can't do.
Yeah, yeah.
And I would do a lot more broadcasting, particularly radio broadcasting, if people would only give me the gigs, but I don't get them. I used to have this wonderful program, and I say it myself, I shouldn't, with Derek Draper as my co-presenter.
Yeah.
My idea, by the way, that we had adversarial presenters, so that nobody who was interviewed and no subject ever got away without a proper grilling. And I've always thought it was the best way of dealing with controversial subjects on broadcasting. And it lasted for quite a while. We had an enormous amount of fun, and I still miss it every day. It must be 20 years since I did it now, probably.
When people like you and me say that about the BBC, that it is so biased towards people of our loose persuasion, people on the left always say, "Oh, well, this is just right-wing paranoia," but it is the case, isn't it? The BBC is not unbiased.
Look, I don't think the BBC was ever meant to be unbiased. I'm fairly certain, and I think Gene Seaton's history has dealt with this to some extent, that even when it was being set up, those who set it up thought it would be a counterbalance to Fleet Street. And in a way, constitutionally, that's not a bad thing, because Fleet Street has always been predominantly conservative, and I would object to that up to a point. I think the difficulty now arises that you really can't get any consistent expression of conservative opinions on so many subjects. And when I say conservative, I do use it with a small c, because the BBC has decided not just that it disagrees with them, which again I don't mind, but I've come to expect it. The BBC is obviously it's a large state institution recruiting from the educated upper middle class, so it's quite likely to be of a liberal persuasion. But it now doesn't even allow these ideas to be expressed. Its discussions take place as if my ideas don't exist. That's what annoys me, and it's particularly noticeable on the subject of drugs. It's almost completely accepted now, the idea that drug legalization is a good thing with a capital G and a capital T. And therefore any argument against it simply isn't considered, let alone heard.
Well, since you brought up the subject, I was going to leave it till sort of the second or third section, but actually this is... I think you make a lot of our differences, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But I think one of the very few significant differences between our ideological positions is on drugs. I mean, I'm a sort of libertarian on drugs, I don't really differentiate between, say, the weed and alcohol. I mean, they're both damaging.
The differentiation is quite simple and straightforward. The one is legal irreversibly and in mass use,
right,
and the other is illegal and not yet in mass use, though it's more commonly used than it should be. And my argument is principally about whether the law should be changed on the drugs which are now illegal. I say it shouldn't be changed. I say that if alcohol were to be introduced into our society now, would we, knowing what we know about it, permit it, or would we keep it illegal? I think most people would say that we would not permit it because of the terrible damage which it does, but we aren't offered that choice. There are a number of things we can do which we don't do. I still very much regret the abolition of the 1915 licensing laws, which existed throughout my young manhood, which meant that drinking was much more restricted than it is now, and I would bring them back tomorrow if I could. But you can't practically make it illegal. Go to Iran. Have you ever been to Iran?
No, I haven't. No.
Well, this was a country in which alcohol was legal, and then the Islamic Republic arrived and made it illegal, and they have completely failed. Despite it being a totalitarian police state, they've completely failed to eradicate it. You can obtain in Tehran within half an hour any drink you want if you want to. I didn't do that. I know people who have, without any difficulty. It's gone. You can't de-legalize something that's been legalized, which is why you have to think very carefully about what you now legalize.
So your line is genuinely you believe that if you could ban alcohol now, and the ban would work, given the damage it does to society, you'd be comfortable with a ban?
Well, I don't know, comfortable. I'd regret it, because I could argue dishonestly that my own use of alcohol would not harm that of others, but my use of alcohol would harm other people's, because by demanding its legality
Yeah.
for myself, and I rarely drink more than 2 glasses of wine on the
Yeah.
occasion, I would be obtaining its legality for the many people who cannot stop at 2 glasses of wine and who will do dreadful damage to themselves and to their families,
Yeah.
and indeed become a burden on society as a whole by it being legal. Most of us, particularly in my trade
Yeah.
of newspaper journalism, have seen alcohol destroy individuals before our very eyes. And it's a
Totally.
terrible thing to see.
But that was,
Imagining the home lives of these people is even worse.
that was particularly the case in the old days, wasn't it? When you and I both remember a Fleet Street when people would disappear at midday and have 3 or 4 pints, and that was part of the deal.
3 or
of being-
4, yes.
3 or 4. And Bill Deeds, I remember, used to be able to sink loads of booze and still function in the afternoon, and it was a
maybe
gift I never
did.
acquired.
What I remember is that the moment coming, and it came to a lot of people of my acquaintance around about the same time, when they were called in by their doctors and told, if you don't stop doing this, you'll die.
Yeah.
And I also saw all the broken marriages and catastrophic professional disaster. I once saw a colleague, this is on my first newspaper, an evening newspaper in Swindon, carried out of the newsroom by 4 strong men, screaming like a child and wetting himself very spectacularly as he did so.
Yeah.
And I've never really seen drinking as a joke ever since.
But you've always... I know that you feel the same about smoking. I think with more justification. You're pissed off with it, apart from anything else, for killing your brother, and the whole culture that was indulging this vice, which was so obviously destructive, and that's changed through things like vaping, which was not introduced by the government. It was a sort of cultural
who
thing.
knows? I can't argue about that because we know so little about it at the moment. What I would say again is that if tobacco were being introduced newly into our society, but we knew about it what we know now,
Yeah.
we would not allow its widespread sale, distribution, advertising.
Sure.
We would probably try to ban it. And because it had not been introduced, we could probably successfully do so. But we can't now. Now, the interesting thing is that the law has been very cleverly used to reduce the amount of smoking. It's, where we are sitting now, in a cafe in Kensington, you can't smoke. In almost any workplace, you can't smoke.
Yeah.
And in lots of other places. And the fundamental penalty, which falls on people if they do, is a legal penalty, but it falls on the person who allows it, interestingly enough.
Yeah.
Which, there was once a law like that about marijuana, but it was overturned by the courts.
So I can see why you believe in tough laws. You think that if something is wrong or is damaging public health, then the government has a duty to eradicate it by whatever means. Whereas I take the view, well, I'm much more
No, that's a misunderstanding. I don't believe in eradication. I'm not a utopian. I don't think foolish or evil things can be eradicated from any human society.
Yeah, but driven underground and made so unpleasant
They
for
can be
people.
seriously discouraged and diminished. I mean, I believe, for instance, that the amount of domestic abuse will most certainly have gone up as the amount of alcohol consumed has risen.
Right,
And I think
okay.
that's a national evil, and I
Okay.
think we could have done something to reduce it, not prevent it. And I think that the consequences of any kind of use of marijuana are only just becoming known, appear to be serious, and it would be incredibly irresponsible at such a moment to abandon the laws against it. You use the phrase tough laws. If a law isn't tough, it's not a law.
Yeah.
A law has to be enforced to be effective. We have laws, but we don't enforce them.
Okay, so my counter would be that I don't idolise the law. I'm worried about the law. For me, individual liberty is more important, and I think it's a natural human instinct
Well, here I must
to desire altered states.
Here I must interpose the words of Karl Marx. No man fights freedom. He fights at most the freedom of others. It's absolutely true. All freedoms compete.
Yeah.
And I don't believe there's any such thing as a right. I don't think rights exist, but freedoms do, and the job of any civilized society is to make sure that one person's freedom does not interfere too much with the freedoms of other people. That's the best you can hope for. If we allow people the freedom to use mind-altering drugs on a large scale, we buy ourselves immediate membership of the third world. In the level of efficiency in almost every public service would be lowered. The level of safety, likewise, unless you were prepared to, and even probably if you were prepared to accept, an immediate draconian regime of drug testing for anything from driving school buses to performing surgery, or any leave alone all kinds of just driving lorries, because otherwise you could not conceivably tolerate it. People would be too high to do the jobs they're expected to do. The other thing you do is you endanger so many people's happiness.
But this is just your Hitchens fantasy about all the terrible things that can go wrong with you're not thinking about the.
That's not a fantasy involved.
All the pleasure people get. What about the people's pleasure in altered states?
What about the people's pleasure of driving while drunk? People used to. You're too young. I can remember relatives of mine saying, I can drive perfectly happily while I'm drunk indeed. It's going to ruin my evenings having this breathalyzer. But the carnage that these people were causing as the price of their pleasure was atrocious.
I hear what you say, but
the law had to be, as soon as it was possible, the law had to be brought in to reduce it, and it very successfully did because it was enforced.
Would you agree that you're a Puritan?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm proud of being a Puritan.
Yeah.
It makes me more unembarrassed about putting forward the ideas that I put forward. But the ideas that I would put forward would be just as rational in the mouth of somebody who was not a Puritan.
Did you ever? You never smoked weed or anything like that?
I made attempts in my school
days.
Didn't enjoy it? A very, very stupid and regrettable thing that I should never have done. I didn't know what I was playing with.
Okay, but so you didn't. You tried a bit of weed. You didn't enjoy it. You drink at most 2 glasses of wine. So it's very easy for you to say that these things should be
I don't care
banned.
whether it's easy for me to say it or not. The question is not whether I am a complete bastard or some kind of person who wants to ruin other people's pleasure. It may well be that I'm all these things and ugly to boot. The question remains: am I right? And the answer to that is yes, I am. So it's an ad hominem point rather than
I think it's very interesting that you concede the point that you are a kind of a miserable bastard, because this is one of the things I wanted to get onto you about. We've had these kind of on-off spats on Twitter about arranging this podcast.
Yeah, you could say, yes.
And one of the things one of the reasons it took. I was really keen on you to get you, and then we had this incident, and you spotted this incident. You recognised your behaviour in this incident, which was we had to do a thing at where was it? The Royal
Chatham House.
Chatham House, and it was a panel on. You probably remember what it was on. I don't.
I seem to remember it was on foreign policy to something, but I can't actually now instantly remember.
It was one of those panels that we went on, and I thought, great. I'm on a panel with Peter Hitchens. This is fantastic. He's going to be on my side of the aisle, and we're going to work as a tag team, and we're going to take on all these ghastly lefties. But no, you seized the opportunity, and you admitted this to me earlier on, and I hope you're going to admit it on this podcast
completely
as well.
Admitted, yes.
You thought, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to exaggerate the differences between me and James Delingpole in order to big up myself and crush. Use James Delingpole.
No need to exaggerate the differences. The differences between you and me were quite apparent. I just exploited the differences. Exaggerate, I wouldn't.
You even went for the cheap shot about the fact that I work for Breitbart, as if. You as
did
a,
I?
Yeah,
what did I say?
Yeah, you totally did. You as somebody who I imagine gets loads of grief for writing for the Daily Mail, although as you never cease to remind them that the Mail on Sunday is a completely different entity from the Daily Mail, and you know how unfair it is to be criticised for the organ that you work for that pays your bills, because we're all.
It's unfair as it is. It happens all the time. Yes.
It
But
didn't.
I think we'd have to- I think we'd- I think I'd
hang
have
on a
to-
second.
I think I'd have to call for a transcript.
Can
here.
you
I
accept?
think I may have
happens.
stood by while you were assaulted for
Yeah.
Breitbart. But I don't think you were particularly. How shall I say? Keen on engaging on that subject.
On which subject?
On the Breitbart subject.
No,
I think I hesitate here because I don't have the record in front of me exactly what was said. But I seem to remember you came under attack.
Yeah.
And I would confess to not having rushed.
Yeah,
Instantly to
which
your
I
aid.
would. The analogy I would use, and I have used
I'd
actually
go that
on podcasts before about Peter Hitchens, is that you're the kind of person, I reckon, and you can correct me if I'm wrong.
Here it comes.
We're at Bastogne. We're in our foxholes. And suddenly we find that the position on the right has been abandoned by Hitchens, who's decided, well, yeah, okay, I can see the Nazis are bad, but look at 101st Airborne. They're a bunch of thugs as well, and I'm really not sure I want to support. What I'm saying is that
This is a bit Godwin's law. Isn't
what
it?
I'm saying is you're unreliable.
Can we have somewhere less ideologically?
You're unreliable.
Ideologically clear-cut
I'm saying
than
that
Bastogne here.
you look after yourself. You're unreliable. You're not companionable. You don't fight for the cause because you're too interested in fighting your own personal battles.
I know.
I felt let down and hurt by that.
I don't wholly accept that. First of all, let's remove Bastogne from the argument and have a non-ideological battle.
Well, it wasn't. I wasn't accusing you of being a Nazi.
No, you weren't.
I was just saying that
you. But I didn't want to leave anybody with the
What I
impression
was
that might have been.
No.
Being
What I was saying is that I wouldn't trust you in the foxhole next to me because I don't think that you would stand your ground on my side, recognising that we have more in common than we don't.
I am a state-registered coward. I would probably have run long before, but I make no boasts on that score. But I don't. Actually, it's much more a question. I fight for myself.
Yes.
I don't regard myself as being part of an identifiable cause because it seems to me that if there ever was a cause of political conservatism in this country, it is so lost that all there are sort of pockets of stay-behind agents occasionally popping up from little holes in the ground. But there is no battle.
We're going to develop this in the next section. But would it be fair to say? I mean, has anyone ever called you a mensch?
Not that I can recall.
I would suspect
people
not.
Call me all kinds of other things, though.
Yeah. I mean, one of the many things I admire about you is your absolute honesty, and I think it's important to me that you admit things that I've observed in you, and that are here to put me off doing this podcast with you. Yeah. Good. Okay.
But I definitely took advantage of your discomfiture at Chatham House.
Okay. That's good.
That much I will cheerfully.
That's good. And I was disappointed in you on that particular occasion.
And I could sense that you were.
Yeah. You're listening to the Delingpole podcast with me, James Delingpole, and my very special and exciting and rather different guest, Peter Hitchens.
Hey folks, I want to tell you about Breitbart News' Second Amendment newsletter, Downrange with A.W.R. Hawkins. Features the top gun stories of the week, every week, and guest columnists like Gun Owners of America's Larry Pratt or Armed American Radio's Mark Walters. Also features a review of a firearm or firearm accessory each week. The newsletter downloads on Thursday, comes right to your email inbox. You can subscribe at breitbart.com/AWR.
This is Delingpole, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here once again is James Delingpole.
Welcome back to the Delingpole podcast with me, James Delingpole, and my very special and enormously requested guest, Peter Hitchens. So, Peter, we have established that you are a Puritan and a complete bastard.
Well, the second one of those is yours.
Well, okay. We've established to my satisfaction that you're a complete bastard. Nevertheless, you are one of the most relentlessly entertaining characters on programs like Question Time. Whenever you're on, I'm always relieved because so many people seem to use that program as an opportunity to virtue signal to the studio audience rather than telling home truths.
Well, is it that they do? I think an awful lot of people don't actually have all that much to say, and haven't thought very much. I think it was a David Starkey moment when some Labour politician began to say, well, I think, and he intervenes, but you don't think. That's exactly what you don't do. And I thought it was perfect question time moment, because you get people are simply regurgitating what they think they should think, and they're applauded by people who also think they should think that. I know you love the phrase virtue signalling and congratulations and all the rest of it, but truth is,
so catty.
it's just conventional. It's just conventional wisdom at work. People are applauding each other for agreeing with each other about things they haven't thought about.
Yeah. Well, that's just
And whatever I can be accused of, and you will doubtless accuse me of a lot of it, what I don't think I can be accused of is not thinking about the subject under discussion.
No. You are, by the way, in a very rare position now, given what's happened to our trade. You're lucky in that you can go into an office, you're paid a reasonable amount of money, I'm assuming, to read round a subject and read the reports from beginning to end, and then condense that into a really good punchy column at the end of the week. But so few journalists are able to do that anymore.
I can't really comment and wouldn't want to comment on what other people do. But I have some advantages which are nothing to do with me, and I can't claim any credit for them. One of them is that I was brought up partly before the Cultural Revolution, and therefore was educated in a way which other people simply don't have.
Educated what? At school, you mean?
Yes,
or by...
partly at school, but that's the second part. The second part of my education has been a 40-year remedial course at the University of Fleet Street. And an awful lot of that has been spent reporting. And what qualifies a person to write a newspaper column, I'm not sure. But whenever anybody says, well, you just write your opinion, I said, yes, but maybe I do. But for decades, I didn't do that. For decades, what I had to do was to do the reporting. And the instincts are still there. I'll still get my pen out and scribble some shorthand notes when necessary. I still know how to make a phone call and how to check a fact.
Yeah.
And I think it's important that one does that. But it's slightly alarming to be given any credit for it.
No, I'm saying you're lucky.
Yeah, I am lucky.
You're really lucky. Just because the exigencies of modern journalism means that most people don't even have time to get beyond the press release. They just churn it out. This is an observable fact.
I wouldn't say that's the case on my own newspaper. The Mail on Sunday still does the business.
The Mail and the Sun are I think both excellent newspapers, but generally, I mean, I'm not going to name the Telegraph because that would be wrong. But you look at what's happened to the Telegraph, for example. It's embarrassing. It's just.
I think
it's been asset stripped.
Let's not get overly sentimental about the old Fleet Street, which had some bad patches as well as some good. But some important things have been lost.
Yeah, like foreign correspondence.
Some people still do it, but it's incredibly expensive to do. People don't have any idea of the enormous cost of doing proper foreign reporting. It's not surprising that's suffered a decline. And also, there was a great difficulty after about 1965, when people had mainly begun to get their news from television, of how newspapers responded to that. And I think the ones which responded most intelligently were the ones who said, first of all, we will find other sorts of news, which is than the sort which the television cover, and also that we will try to illuminate it more with commentary, and that has led, of course, to the rise of the columnists.
Well,
I'm in favour of that. From the beginning, when I first arrived in Fleet Street in the late 1970s on a broadsheet Daily Express, I thought we're wasting a lot of time telling people what they heard on the news last night, and that's largely gone. You
were lucky enough, I think, to have had another training which you haven't mentioned, which is that you went through being a Trotskyist. Is that right?
Certainly, yeah.
Now, how long did that last?
I probably joined the International Socialists. There must be some records somewhere. I think MI5's records this year have been destroyed. I probably joined the International Socialists in the late summer or autumn of 1968. And I resigned at some point in 1975, and I wrote a letter of resignation, which I used to think MI5 must have even if nobody else had, because I didn't keep a copy.
Yeah.
So that's about 7 years of up and down, straightforward avowed Marxism-Leninism, with some time before as a sort of teenage multi-purpose revolutionary and some time afterwards on a sort of Kerstlerian fringe of being a former revolutionary trying to find a way into social democracy.
Did it... Well, this is a stupid question, obviously it did. But how did it make sense? I mean, with hindsight, looking back at what you believed then...
I needed a worldview. I'd been brought up, before the Cultural Revolution, I'd been brought up as a Christian. I'd been brought up as a patriot.
Yeah.
And I saw in my very early teens, in fact before that, quite visible, I saw the society that I'd been brought up to take part in disintegrating before my eyes. I can just remember Suez. What I didn't realize at the time was what a blow that had been to my father, who was a naval officer. Almost certainly it led to the premature end of his career, because after Suez the conventional armed forces pretty much got cut to pieces, and he was a victim of that. He would probably have had many more years in uniform without it. And all authority began to leak out. The old Leninist maxim, take the bayonet, push. If you find steel, withdraw, try again somewhere else. If you find mush, keep pushing.
Yeah.
I found, as a troublesome teenager, with almost all figures of authority, I pushed and it was mush. They'd lost their confidence after Suez, and they lost it even more after Perfumer.
Yeah.
And these things came one on top of another. They were, first of all, they were dishonest, and then they were comical, and probably the worst blow you can suffer as any kind of authority figure or structure is to become funny. And Profumo made them funny, and after that there wasn't really any hope. And so there I was, with no worldview left, brought up for a world that no longer existed, and I wanted to believe in something, and I found that revolutionary socialism was a very appealing and enjoyable substitute.
Right.
It believed that its aims were good. It was not soppy. On the contrary, it was as hard as nails.
It was like a religion.
As hard as nails. No, much more like old-fashioned British patriotism.
Right.
This is what we believe in. This is what we defend. This is what we fight for. And if attacked, we fight back. And if and we're not we're hard about it. That appealed to me too. So less like religion. The only resemblance to religion was the worldview, the view of the cosmos which it provided.
Right. But one thing I've noticed about
which was of a place, I should say, where there was no God, and therefore man was free to do as he wished in a way which religion would never have permitted.
Well, see, a lot of the people I admire, ideologically, people like Brendan O'Neill. I don't know, you probably think he's a splitter or a traitor or something.
I think Brendan is also a former comrade, isn't he?
That's what I mean. Brendan O'Neill, Claire Fox, Frank Furedi, all these Institute of Ideas
They came
people.
from a very specific area of the
they did.
of the Marxist-Leninist spectrum.
They did, but it. When I said earlier that I rather envied you having this background, it seems to me that it's a bit like sort of having been a Jesuit. You get trained in a sort of intellectual discipline,
yes.
a way of thinking.
Yeah, very much so.
And that's probably been of advantage to you.
It's a huge benefit. The trouble is that it means I run ahead of people, and I can. The analysis still works, and gives me a huge advantage in assessing things.
But how does it?
But the problem is, it makes me into a Cassandra. I see what's going on, but I'm not believed. So I will, and also I say things which appear completely outrageous to people.
Right.
So when I say that New Labour was a Euro-communist project, which
yes.
it was, people just goggle and say, "Oh, what on earth are you talking about? New Labour was right-wing. New Labour was Tory." And I say, it wasn't. I recognise it. I point out to people this thing about New Labour. I think at one stage, 6 members of Blair's cabinet, including Blair himself, were undeclared former Marxist-Leninists who've never explained or regretted their previous position. 6, including the Defence Secretary and the Prime Minister. And people call this a right-wing government.
Right.
And Blair's own confession to Peter Hennessy on Radio 4 a few months ago, that he joined a Marxist organisation when he was at university, barely featured in the public prints. And the reason for this is it doesn't fit with the conventional wisdom that Blair was actually a Tory.
That is actually almost my number one favourite Hitchens trope, that one about Blair being much more left-wing than... Do you think...
Well, Blair himself, I mean, probably didn't... I mean, these Jeff Gallup people who he associated with probably had a better idea of what he was doing than he did, and I'm sure that Mrs. Blair was always and remains a more intelligent and acute person than he ever was. But the fact is, he was a university Trotskyist, and one has to ask how he then ended up in the Labour Party.
Yeah. So,
because the one thing we all had in common, the Trotskyists of the late 60s and early 1970s, of which he is now known to be one, is we despise the Labour Party above all things.
So can you just give me a sort of précis of what you were striving for as a Trotskyite?
Yeah, global utopia. We were against the idea of nation states and borders.
Right.
We believed that they and almost all cultural restraints, such as Christianity,
the family,
national
church.
Well, yeah, the married family, were restraints on the development of civilization towards its utopian ideal, which was the perfect socialist society of equality and love, peace, justice, and brotherhood. Which, of course, would be surrounded by a sea of blood, owing to the means necessary to get there. But we genuinely believe that we would get there. What I now know is that utopia is approached across a sea of blood, and you never arrive.
Right. And at the time, did you like the idea of that sea of blood?
Oh, yes, I was homicidal. Yes, it is a homicidal form of politics, and I was I was unopposed to political violence. Let's put it like
right.
that.
And so, do you think your departure from Trotskyism was connected with your frontal lobes developing properly?
I think that's a sort of diversion from my departure from Trotskyism resulted from my reasoning faculties understanding that this was a dangerous and rather wicked fantasy which didn't accord with reality. You could only have sustained these opinions if you were doing what I was doing, living on a grant in a plate glass campus, completely separated from the real world, meeting only other people with whom you agreed. As soon as I had to earn a living, live in a bedsit, deal with policemen, borough councillors, firemen, teachers, and people who ran flower shows the way that you did as a local newspaper reporter in those days, you couldn't sustain it. Yeah. And also, you then also discovered just how bizarre and how unappealing to normal people and appealing to abnormal people the idea was. I still remember going out. We used to get people would fill in a form in the Socialist Worker, and if it was round where I was the only international socialist in Swindon, as far as I can recall, and they would then send it on to me to follow up. And I went out to a village outside Swindon one windy night on my bicycle to visit this guy, and he was really gaunt and terrifying, and his wife was plainly in fear of him.
Yeah.
I couldn't get out of there fast enough. And I was visiting the Bath branch a few weeks later, and I told them about this encounter, and they said, "Oh, him. We had to lock him in a cellar. He has a gun." And the Queen was on a visit to Bath, and he was going to try to assassinate her. And I thought, I'm dealing with lunatics here. About this time, I also read one of Arthur Koestler's less well-known works called Arrival and Departure, in which he makes what still seems to me to be the valid point, that world reformers tend to want to reform the world as a substitute for reforming themselves. They've usually got something wrong with them. And I felt this was a pretty good illustration. So it set me to thinking, along with all the other things, this doesn't add up anymore.
Okay. So
and it's the reality of daily life. It's not some growth of a lobe. It's just an understanding that the world is not the fantasy you conceived it to be when you were at university in the early 1970s.
But so do you see your younger self, in the Corbynistas now, in Momentum and stuff?
No, that's a completely different tradition. Corbyn is not. I saw all those people when I was in the Labour Party in northwest London in the late 1970s and early 1980s. Then they were very much there, and they were. I used to get called to order during my own speeches for doing things like being against the IRA or being in favour of nuclear deterrence. And
So even then you were pissing off
the sympathy for the willingness to make excuses for IRA terrorism among the North London left at that time was the most alarming thing about them. But they weren't anything like as developed in Marxism-Leninism as I had been. Their concerns were much narrower. And I don't think Corbyn has ever been to any extent a fully developed Marxist. I think he's just a person trapped in a sort of backwater or creek of the London left, where certain views are de rigueur. But I think that's about all there is to it.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe the variant on Marxism-Leninism has changed in the interim, but surely it's attracting the same kind of people.
I don't know.
The kids.
I don't know them well enough anymore. I don't necessarily. All my own experience is particular. I don't make myself out to be a sociological phenomenon.
Right.
I do sometimes joke that it did seem to me when I began to look back on the period as if somebody had put something in the water.
Yeah.
And there is that sensation sometimes when looking at the 60s. But actually, I think it was much more they put something in the music.
Right.
Which was hugely influential on the way in which we thought and behaved at that time. Not in a political way, but in a moral way, and in separating us almost completely from the authority and customs of our parents.
Okay. What you're saying that pop music.
I think it was immensely influential in separating people from what they had previously believed and thought. Yes.
I can see that. So I don't think of you as having been a groovy pop person. Who were you listening to?
I used to listen to, again, I think I probably stopped listening to popular music about 1969.
Okay.
Possibly before then. I used to listen to pirate radio. I used to listen to Big L, Radio London, on 266 band, and all that stuff. And actually, I can listen to it now and think, well, it's not very good. But on the other hand, I can also listen to it now and think, I can quite understand how the mind of an adolescent could be invaded by the power of this stuff, because it is very powerful.
Yeah.
I can still, some of it, particularly Beat on the Ledge, Fairport Convention, will still give me a frisson.
Okay,
of
so
the kind that it did at the time. Most of it won't. That does. Some other stuff will, but most of it goes past me. But it did change the mood of the country. Even if you were living in fairly staid provincial circumstances, you felt there was something going on.
So, do you don't put on an album now and listen to it for pleasure? No. So, but I'm just trying to establish what you were listening to. So you're listening to kind of a bit of folk rock, a bit of sort of psychedelic white music, or soul as well.
These categories didn't exist, and I listened to what came out of the Ferranti transistor radio on the 266 medium wave band, and that's what I listened to.
Right.
All of it. Some of it I like more than others.
Right. And
but these categories didn't exist then, as far as I know. It was just pop music. It was constantly present.
Right.
In the background, and I think it created an atmosphere.
Right. Do you know, I've noticed you are way the most difficult person I've had on the podcast.
Good.
Yeah.
I should hope so.
No, but I find talking to you that there are moments when I go, yeah, he is so right. I'm absolutely right about Blair. You've put your finger on something that's really puzzled me about the Blair era, which is how can somebody perceived to be so centrist yet have done so much damage to the country?
Well, because he wasn't what he.
Yeah. So I like that, but then at other times I'm thinking. You're like an eel. I mean, you're just so bloody slippery. You seem to slip out of things. I'll say something to you which I think is bleeding obvious, like Corbynistas are kind of just a version of what you were when you were a young man, and you say no, absolutely not.
No, I don't think it's true.
I know. I think it's just
I'm not trying to evade anything. I don't recognise in them what I was doing.
Yeah.
They're nothing like as revolutionary as I was, and actually, I would add this. They're nothing like as revolutionary as the Blairites were or not.
That's an interesting point. No, I think part of it is your.
If I had continued to be what I was, as most of my coevals did, and I stopped being. If I'd continued to be what I was, if I hadn't gone so deep into the Marxist-Leninist thing as I did, and had just skittered along the surface of it, as most of my contemporaries did, and therefore continue to hold those vague ideas, I would have been a Blairite.
Right.
I would have been one of them.
You could have been successful.
That's who they. No, it's true.
Yeah.
That's who they are. They are what I would have been. Corbyn is not what I would have been. The Blair lot are what I would have been if I'd stayed on the path that I'm on.
Do you think
that I was on in 1973?
In that sense, do you think that Blairism is more dangerous than Corbynism?
Immensely.
Right.
Not least because people aren't aware of what it is that they're facing. They genuinely think this is some kind of moderate, restrained thing. When it is a colossal, very calculated cultural revolution. I won't name him because he's a friend and I like him, and there's no point in doing this. Very shortly before the 1997 election, he had been working as a journalist, and I knew he was a man of the left, but he outed himself to me and said he was about to go and work for the Blair machine. And we went for a sort of farewell drink because I realised we would be separated by this. And he said to me as a parting joke, "You have no idea how extensive the Blair project is. You have no idea at all." And I suddenly thought, actually, yes, I do. And I knew from that moment that this wasn't just a change of government.
Were the people behind
and he
Blair?
was a very intelligent, still is a very intelligent person.
Blair. So, did this come from Blair, or was he a kind of, well, not quite a Manchurian candidate, but was he the creation of a whole team of people?
Blair is a let's not go too much into Blair. I mean, we know now from Peter Hennessy that he was a student Trotskyist.
Yeah.
We don't know how he got from there to being a Labour Party activist in northeast London. What I always knew was that the story about his rise through the Labour Party was bogus, because people would say things like he was a member of the moderate Labour Coordinating Committee. And I thought, moderate Labour Coordinating Committee? You must be joking. And then the story of his selection for Sedgefield, which he's supposed to have got because he sat quietly and watched the football. A public schoolboy with no trade union experience and no real political background does not beat a leathery old professional Labour dinosaur like Les Huckfield for a northern seat selection by accident.
So he was like Obama in that respect.
Sorry?
He was like Obama in that respect.
No. Obama was a very interesting machine man. And the story of Obama's rise is Obama was an ambitious Chicago machine man in the Daily Machine in Chicago, and he's much cleverer by a mile than Blair. Could never have written Dreams from My Father.
Right.
Obama is immensely cleverer than Blair. No, what Blair was the anti-foot. Bodies, I believe, probably the Society of Labour Lawyers, where I first met him, and large parts of the then trade union movement got together to say we need a leader who is the opposite of Michael Foot, and they began looking for somebody. And I think that's the root of Blair. But the real people in the Blair Revolution are not Blair himself, who was a figurehead and a public relations front. The real executives were people such as Alistair Campbell. I don't know whether you know Alistair, but if you compare him
with him.
I mean, Gordon Brown as well, but Alistair, by comparison with Blair, Alistair is a man with a powerful mind and also considerable force of character and personality and determination, whose actual politics have never really been examined by anybody. But I think it would be safe to say that the politics of a pretty hard cultural and moral left. Okay, I would say that during the initial and crucial period of the Blair premiership, Alistair Campbell was the executive prime minister, not Blair.
Okay.
And Peter Mandelson, again, a very skillful operator. Gordon Brown, a man who again comes from a section of the Scottish left which is extremely ideological, though his antecedents are, as far as I know, Scottish Labour and nothing else. Again, a man of very, very powerful intellect and determination, which Blair is not. These people had a plan,
right?
And they pursued it, and they managed to get media patsies to swallow things like tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime, education. This sort of meaningless populist slogans which appear to be conservative without being, as the real intentions of the government. Well, it got on with abolishing heterosexual marriage, destroying what was left of rigour in the educational system, plunging the country as deep as it could get into the European Union, engaging in utopian idealistic foreign wars, and on top of that, bankrupting the country.
Yes.
They did all these things behind a front of manipulative populism. That's the phrase I was searching for, which people amazingly believed. I mean, the crucial moment for me when I parted company with Fleet Street on coverage of the Labour Party was Neil Kinnock's supposedly great anti-militant speech at Bournemouth. The delivering redundancy notices in taxi drivers speech. Where everyone said he's destroyed the left. I thought, what are you talking about? He's destroyed the militant tendency, a tiny little flea bite of finger-jabbing non-entities. Kinnock is actually the man who has installed the left at the very heart of Labour Party decision-making, and you can't see it because you don't have my background or training.
No.
I tried arguing with people at the time. I said, "You've been fooled." It was like being a caterpillar in front of a steamroller. I might as well not have bothered.
I lived through that era too, and I do remember feeling so at odds with the prevailing culture. Everyone seemed to think that, look, a new flight destination has opened in Europe. Look at this wonderful new destination. Look at all these white goods we can now buy. And everyone was being bought off with this kind of, what was it, the third way, the idea that some accommodation had been reached.
Before then, people couldn't understand that the clever left, that the intelligent and thoughtful left, was partly making progress by appearing to be brutal towards the non-entity, tiny sectarian left, that they used it for triangulation purposes. Right. That the crushing of the meaningless militant tendency, or Revolutionary Socialist League as we Trotskyists know it to be, didn't make a ha'porth of difference to how left the Labour Party was, but it in fact allowed a very left-wing Labour leadership to gain the plaudits of the media.
You're listening to the Delingpole podcast with me, James Delingpole. That bit was quite long, and it was too interesting to cut you short. I love that. I've got my money's worth there if I'm buying you your tea. More in a moment.
Sonny's Corner with Sonny Johnson.
No matter what the story of the day is, I'm going to make sure that we talk about these issues. I am going to make sure that when apologies are necessary, we're going to be there with a camera and with a spotlight. Somebody on this side of the aisle is there to say the movement, it was wrong. There are valid things that are happening in your city that actually need our attention.
Sonny's Corner, Saturday at 1 p.m. East on Sirius XM Patriot 125.
This is Delingpole, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here once again is James Delingpole.
Welcome back to the Delingpole podcast with me, James Delingpole, and I expected him to be interesting, but very interesting guest, Peter Hitchens. What were you saying just then about why you get this and nobody else does?
Well, I'm unique. I'm the only living ex-Marxist-Leninist who's still in circulation as far as I know.
Yeah.
I think there are any others.
One of the things you've taken me to task for on Twitter is that I'm not a real conservative. Just tell me why.
Well, it's the drugs.
Oh, it's just not the drugs?
It's the drugs. I mean,
it
sums it up. I mean,
right.
It's all I know.
Right.
I mean, all kinds of things would seem to me probably to flow outwards from that.
Right.
But I would say you were probably some sort of Ayn Randish, open inverted commas, libertarian, close inverted commas, and that seems to me to be opposed to something very fundamental about conservatism.
Which is?
Well, it is, I think, absolutely ab initio, it is Christian. And
right.
therefore that would oppose itself to what I would regard as the selfism of libertarianism.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And as I was taught from an early age, a difference of 1 or 2 degrees at the beginning of an angle may seem very small, but after 100 miles or so, it's a very, very wide gap.
Yeah. You see, this is another area, obviously, where we differ, because I kind of think that the left is a major problem, and that those of us on the right, however loosely defined, should fight for the.
But the thing, you can't
cause.
fight an enemy you don't understand. You can't fight an enemy who you don't really oppose. And on both of those counts, modern British and American political conservatism are at fault. They've never understood the left. They don't. They never. After the Cold War was over, they never understood that trade union power didn't matter. For instance, they never understood that economics weren't fundamental to the left anymore. They didn't understand the left were quite capable of making an accommodation with capitalism. The modern world is the hideous love child of Margaret Thatcher and Deng Xiaoping, and they get on fine.
Are you not a Thatcher fan?
I'm absolutely not a Thatcherite. No, I think Mrs. Thatcher is a grotesquely overrated figure. I mean, I have some admiration for her personally.
Right.
I think that the story of her rise, from her beginnings to the rest, is very moving.
Yeah.
But I do not think that politically, and I remember the first time I ever went to the House of Commons, seeing her being howled down by male Labour MPs. I felt a very strong sympathy for her as a woman being bayed at by misogynists' oafs, and on those things I'm not shiftable. But in terms of her politics, I think that they are hugely overrated. She
Because
wasn't
she's
a
not a
conservative
conservative.
in any meaningful fashion.
Right.
Nor was Ronald Reagan.
Who's your model conservative?
I don't have one.
Right.
I think that the problem with conservatism is that the Conservative Party is a machine for obtaining office for the sons of gentlemen. And there's nothing it will not do for that aim. It would guillotine the Queen in Trafalgar Square if it thought that it would keep it in office. It's got no principles at all.
Okay.
And the name is a terrible. That's why I really hoped, before the 2010 election, I really hoped that the Conservative Party could be destroyed, and it was quite possible it could have been done then.
Yes.
But the opportunity was missed.
But
I don't. The real problem has been for a very long time the Conservative Party has not understood the nature of the left. The left's attack is Gramscian. The left's attack is moral. The left is not interested in nationalising the ice cream industry. The left is interested in nationalising childhood. The left is not interested particularly in appeasing foreign powers, or whatever it is you want to accuse them of. The left is interested in undermining the institution of marriage and making the state more powerful in the lives of individuals. The left's most fundamental shibboleth is not the old Clause 4 of the Labour Party, but comprehensive education. It's absolutely fascinating. People have never understood how vitally important comprehensive schooling was. Throughout the Blair years, it was the thing that they would always stand there. We'd never give an inch on this. We will not have returned to selection education. Why did this matter so much to them? Because of their virulent dogmatic egalitarianism.
right.
Which is the real heart of it. It's the thing they will not shift from. You cannot, however intelligent a Blairite is, you will not get them to shift from a support for comprehensive education. Partly this is because all of them as individuals have discovered how they can evade it for their own children, as revolutionary elites always do.
Yes.
In Moscow, under the Soviet rule, there was Shkola Nomer Adin, school number 1, which was the elite school. A very fine translator who once worked for me in Moscow went to it because her grandfather was a Red Army general. And for the only time, he was a very principled Bolshevik, but for the one time in his life he pulled strings. He said, my granddaughter is going to that school.
Yeah.
It was the school. And there's the Lenin High School in Havana, the Mangyongdae High School in Pyongyang, and I'm sure was one in Peking. They always have these ways out. And William Ellis, of course, on Parliament Hill in London, and Camden girls qualify in the same way in the London left. These are people who allegedly hate grammar schools and selection.
So this is,
but they actually send their children to schools which are fantastically selected.
and your solution to this problem would be grammar schools.
Grammar schools are the. Let's take a metaphor here. Not so much a metaphor. Let's say when we had grammar schools, The people who went to them had, and this was painful for them, and I know people whom this is painful, they came often from backgrounds where they spoke with local accents.
Yeah.
And at grammar schools, they found themselves more and more compelled to speak in a received pronunciation way. And sure, this was, this was a problem for them, and I don't doubt that it's one of the awful things of the British class system. I'm not saying that they should have been. Listen to Joan Bakewell. I don't imagine she spoke like that when she first went to her grammar school, as an example. Now, the children of the upper middle classes who used to speak RP, as soon as they go into the education system, speak more and more estuary.
Yeah.
The direction of education is reversed. Instead of being a machine for finding those people who were capable of benefiting from a highly selective and rigorous education and propelling them into the elite, whoever they were, and from whatever background they came. In 1953, 65% of the pupils at grammar schools in England were from working class homes. 65%. Whoever they were, they could go to the very top. Now we have an education system which says we must not discriminate between people on the grounds of intelligence, even if there's a cost to the country in terms of lost educational opportunity. We must always pursue an egalitarian outcome, equality of outcome, and therefore instead of people, the classes are supposedly brought together by being merged, rather than brought together by working class people being brought into the middle class. That's the reverse. And indeed, this was known. You will know, or will you, the name of the person who invented comprehensive schools?
The one who said, I want to destroy every...
No, he didn't invent them. No, nobody knows this fact except me. Graham Savage was his name. He did so in the 1920s when we had a Board of Education instead of Minister of Education. He went to North America and he came back and said that what Britain should do to make the country more democratic was to introduce American-type high schools, which is what comprehensive schools effectively are. And he admitted in the paper that he wrote, and subsequently, that this would mean an educational loss, particularly for the brightest, but he thought it was worth it.
Right.
This is one of those facts that almost nobody knows. They knew from the very beginning that it was a political project with an educational disadvantage. There has never been any argument that comprehensive schools improve education, because they don't.
Because the American education system was quite left quite early, wasn't it? Was that
the
guy
American education
Dewey?
system was designed to, well, there was, and funnily enough, if you read To Kill a Mockingbird, you'll find references to the dumbing down of American education in the 1930s in there. But the fundamental purpose of the American public schools was to create Americans. They were socializing, and the idea was to socialize and make people American. And indeed, they were set up in many states in opposition to Catholic schools because the government feared that if the Catholic schools went unchallenged, that they would dominate education and that sectarianism would result. So there was an actual intent in the formation of American public schools and high schools, not so much to educate as to socialize. And the really important part of education in the United States has always been college. School socializes, college educates. And it used to be said when I was at school, that, which would never be said now, that a set of English A-levels was the equivalent of an American college degree. Which I think was more or less true at the time, but nobody would say that now.
Do you think, I mean, taking a step back, do you think it was a good idea that the education system created Americans, or...? It's
a matter for the Americans. I'm not...
Because Bismarck did something similar, didn't he?
One argument at a time.
Right.
America is America, it's not Britain, and its most fundamental characteristic is that in 1776 it said, we aren't going to be run by the British anymore, and so I leave them to it.
Okay, and where are you on public schools?
I think that they are a regrettable, their continued existence in their current form is a regrettable consequence of the abolition of selective state education. I think it would be crazy to destroy institutions such as Winchester or Eton as such, but I think if you could integrate them into the state system through selection by ability, then they would return to their original purpose, which was precisely that, to find the brightest children and to give them a superb education. That's what Winchester and Eton were founded for.
Yes.
And they don't do it anymore. because you can't get into them unless you've got a lot of money.
No, actually, it's not quite true. They are they're mega
but
selective,
it's
and lots
very,
of boys are
very-
Eton on bursaries.
It's very difficult. Eton more than Winchester. Winchester doesn't have much of an endowment, but it is, yeah.
What you say about Winchester is true, but Eton's got a very high proportion of kids on bursaries.
Yeah,
I know,
more, but
because
I don't
we've
know,
been through it.
They
But
can't have much of a proportion because they can't afford it. Eden is done, but the point that I'm making is that it's not done as it should be done as it used to be done through the direct grant system, where any child who passed the exam, and it doesn't necessarily have to be an exam for me. I'm probably more in favour of the German system of assessment. And I'm probably more in favour of transfer at 13 than at 11 too, but whatever it is, any child from any home who is considered able to do it could be sent to some of the best schools in the country under a direct grant system. Schools like Manchester Grammar or Oxford High School for Girls or Magdalen College School in Oxford, these were open to state school pupils. And Eton and Winchester should be too.
Do you know what?
But I would never destroy a good institution, but I would open it in a way that didn't destroy it.
I like you much more when I just point the mic at you and you just hold forth, because you're very good at holding forth in an interesting way and you know loads and loads of stuff. I just wanted to make one final point to you, which is, you know that phrase, pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will.
Antonio Gramsci.
Yeah, you're very good at the pessimism part, but I don't see any optimism in you at all.
I'm not a Gramscian.
No, but I forget who said it.
I'm a latitudinarian Anglican.
I'm saying is
I'm not obliged to be optimistic at all.
You're such a bloody
I'm
eel.
optimistic about eternity. I'm completely pessimistic about the temporal.
But you come up with, you speak so much truth to power, and you say so many good things. But I think you rather spoil it slightly by being so relentlessly negative about. How are we going to
negative?
How are we going to save
sound
the?
like we sound one of my public school teachers.
Yeah,
Oh, you're so negative, Hitchens.
How? Yeah. Well,
Why don't you support the school rugby team more?
Yeah. Well, I can imagine, but most of us sort of grow out of that. And you're still sitting on the sidelines saying, "Yeah, I'm not going to support the bloody fascist first 15."
Why should I grow? I didn't say anything. I didn't say fascist. Why should I grow out of it?
Or a fascist first 11
Why should I grow out of it?
with their regimented cricket skills.
Why should I grow out of it?
No, I agree with you about not growing up.
Pessimism is a perfectly sensible attitude towards life, and indeed it's the key to happiness.
Can I just go back to Bastogne for a moment? I know you hate the analogy, but if we're going to defeat these fuckers, we need to fight together,
We've already beaten us.
we need to have a yes.
We are already beaten. It's not. I don't. No, I'm not. If you want to go on a suicide mission, I'll go to the memorial service afterwards. But we are beaten. We were beaten long ago.
You know, Pandora's box. The one thing that stays in the box is hope, and you haven't even got the hope.
Well, I'm Greek mythology is fun, but it's not the foundation of truth. I've said my hope is not temporal.
Mythology is the way we explain it. We explain our.
My hope is eternal, not temporal. That's how I sustain it.
So basically, you're not dissimilar from the Islamists on this one. That we're never going to.
I'm not dissimilar from them. No, I think they have some
merit.
They have some power. Well, of course, they have some merit.
Well, they've got rigour. We can give them that.
You must have met Muslims who you found in some way or other admirable in terms of charity or other characteristics.
I admire the Imam of Peace,
which stem from their faith. Wouldn't generalise about Muslims any more than I generalise about Christians.
No, but
I've certainly met and been on friendly terms with plenty of Muslims who don't seem to me to have any desire to do away with me.
No, I do think it is the case though that this is the good thing about you and the bloody annoying thing about you, that you're just such a readable but miserable bastard. I mean, when are you?
I'm not miserable. Have I been in the slightest bit miserable?
No, you're great company, but that's slightly different.
Do I look as if I'm down in the dumps?
I'm not going to.
Do I look as if I'm filled with existential despair? Because I'm not. No.
You remind me slightly.
You know what the best thing that's happened in the past week has been? The most inspiring thing.
Was it the 1-1 draw, England and
No, you're wrong.
Italy.
It was the amazing act of the French police officer who substituted himself for a woman hostage. I think it's the most astonishing thing.
I'm so with you.
Totally inspiring. I'm disappointed actually that there has not been a great deal. And the French, of course, are quite rightly convulsed about it, but I think we should pay more attention to it here. Giles Fraser, who you probably don't like, but I do
I
quite
quite like because he was
gave an
Brexit.
extraordinarily good thought for the day
On that subject.
yesterday, which was interesting in thought for the day terms. Exceptionally, he's often good on this issue. Exceptionally, totally uncompromisingly Christian statement.
Do you know what?
On the BBC, you should tune into it and listen to it.
I think on that uncharacteristic note of optimism and faith, and because what does it tell us about anything?
That there is hope,
There is hope.
but it's not necessarily going to come from the bloody Conservative.
No, well, amen, bro. You're listening to the Delingpole podcast with me, James Delingpole, and my wonderful guest in his curmudgeonly bastard idiosyncratic way, Peter Hitchens. Thank you and goodbye.
You didn't frankly have the balls to put country before party.